Hello, Jaime. How's it going?
Hello.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Hey, Jackie.
Okay,
How are
good.
you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. Thank you. Congratulations on your wedding.
Oh, thank you so much. It's really, I'm really excited about it. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome.
Let's see. We're already recording, so that's good. Apparently, I forgot to record the new secrets management sync last time, so now I'm like kicking myself in the face for it because I try my best to always record, and that's why I have things to set to auto record so I don't have to worry about it. But
Yeah.
it is what it is.
You know, they enabled the auto recording goes into Google Drive. If you change the meeting name to include the rec at the
Okay.
beginning, I'll
It'll
point
do
you
it.
in the channel. Yeah.
Thank you. That'd be awesome. Okay. It might just be us today. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started. First, I'll give an introduction. Hey, Kras.
Hey.
So think bigs are a process that GitLab has across product management, which allows us to sort of think and brainstorm about product improvements without constraints. So typically it allows us to sort of consider moonshots or really big picture ideas, and then we can identify opportunities to potentially iterate and implement those features. So a really good example of this was how we decided to partner with Package to create a version dependencies scope and vision. So now we have this idea out there that we're going to begin iterating on to allow us to distribute binaries within the releases page, right? So how this meeting works and how it's worked in the past is that we would have a meeting every other week for an hour, and there'd be several agenda topics that were populated either from previous conversations that we've had, or during the week something's been identified and we'll drop it on this agenda. I have a couple of items that are parking lot think bigs, which are like in the backlog that we can pull into any think big, or we can run off the cuff and kind of talk about items depending on the audience. So what this looks like is we have a meeting, we create issues, put them in the backlog. I may validate some of those problems that we're looking to solve, and then we potentially scope it and actually deliver the feature. It's a really cool opportunity to think outside of the narrow scope that I end up having talking to customers or talking to analysts that are very focused on how we're going to compete against existing solutions or how we're going to win a deal. It allows us to really think innovatively. So the goal is to think creatively, to look at the customer problems in release management and try to solve for them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So from a topic perspective, I listed out 3 bullet points of things that are on my mind right now that are longer term. One of them is managing deployments at scale. So when we started looking at the environments dashboard, the biggest complaint that we received from our users is that it's not discoverable, and I have hundreds of environments and this only shows 21. So if we're wanting to surface problems in production, the environments dashboard is definitely not the place to do it because they can't triage anything from that. Our competitors like Zebia Labs and Electric Cloud and Jenkins really empower users to manage environments at various different clients or different targets easily. So that's an opportunity for us to get better at. The second bullet point I have here that's on my mind are automatic release notes. So we were working with Shinya on implementing semantic release as a tool, and you've seen some traffic about this inside our issues as well as on my direction page and in our channel. There's a lot of opportunity there where we can reduce the cruft of manually creating release notes by using semantic release in our projects. And then lastly, the idea of a release pipeline and creating a release bundle inside of GitLab. So those are just 3 things that are on my mind. Are any of those interesting to you? Do you guys have topics that you actually want to talk about? I'm all ears.
Yeah, I don't have anything, but we can talk about these. I have some thoughts.
Yeah, I didn't have anything either. Mostly like, because it's the first time I attended and wasn't sure how it works. So thanks for the intro. That's
yeah,
great.
and typically I will, the day before, I'll post in the Slack channel, hey, here's our agenda. Don't forget to populate topics. But since this was our first APAC one, I wanted to give you like a context setting and then lob you some topics for us to discuss so you can get a feel for how we do it. And then if this isn't valuable for you all, we don't have to do the APAC time zone anymore. You know, like if this is something you don't really want to participate in, or it's not something that you're interested in, we don't have to do it. I don't want to force you to do something that you're like, Jackie, this is awful.
Well, we can, I guess we can try doing it, I don't know, monthly for a few times, see how it goes.
Yeah, so the APAC one is going to be monthly, because it's so that'll be perfect.
Is it usually like bi-weekly or how?
Yeah. So we have a US EMEA time zone one on the second the second to last Thursday of the month, and then the APAC time zone is the first Tuesday of the month. So then it alternates. Okay, so which topic do you want to dive into? Which one's the most interesting? I feel like both of you might have context around automatic release notes, given that we have the releaser CLI tool, and Kraz, you worked on some of those issues. Does that sound good to kind of dive into and talk about?
Well, yeah, I have some, like, from developers' perspective, which is kind of like mostly issues I see with this, and we should think how to solve rather than moonshots and like you said. But the thing is that we've seen many examples how people do this internally for different projects, and it's always, why don't we adopt this as a feature? But the problem I see is that all of these examples is working very well for the given project because it's very specific to the given project. And I was thinking if we adopt one of these as a feature, that it may not work well for many cases, because, you know, like every release process is a bit different, and the way people do their release notes are a bit different. So I was thinking we probably can do this as like kind of more pluggable, so people have list of, we support different ways to generate release notes, and they still will not cover all the cases, but will cover like few of them. So, and you have an option to choose which way to use for your releases, because some people like may be happy just with list of commits, or just a list of the merge commits, or list of the merge requests with given label. Like there are so many options, so it's hard to see how we can choose one and like make it, or maybe it's just to me, but I find it hard to think of a way that will be working for everyone.
Yeah. So let me
so even if we start with just one and keep it that for a long, it should be done with like being pluggable in mind, so that we can easily add new or something. That at least that's what I was thinking. Like that's what I've been thinking. Every time I see one of those examples and people saying, "Why not we use it?" It's like it's always super specific to the given project, or even it's specific to what type of project is, because Rails projects are structured in one way, Node.js project in the other, and yeah.
That's another thing, like specifically with semantic release and Go projects. There's a bit of an issue if you kind of automate this. The way Go handles dependencies requires the version to be very specific. So if for whatever reason you end up increasing the major release for your module, it may not be compatible in the future with other releases. With other projects. That's because of the nature of Go modules. If you add for example, you have a V2 eventually that's automatically released because you follow your semantic release and you have a breaking change in your commit and then automatically created a V2 tag, then that's going to cause a bit of problems with the environments in Go, just because of the way they handle the modules. So yeah, but then again, this is a very specific use case just for Go.
Yeah, so I think these are all super good points, and I appreciate the granular look at it. If I was to frame up the generic requirements on what I hear time and time again about what people are looking for from an auto changelog, is that they want a configurable option per project for generating release notes. And by configurable, they want to be able to set the source of the release note. So maybe they have it from issues, from merge requests, from Git tag annotations. And all of those should be set at the project level or cascaded down from the group. That's like a generic requirement. So I think that lends itself really nicely to what you were saying, Kraz, is that we should build multiple ways to support generating release notes and allow the users to select them. When I think about a way to iterate with this, I think that affording semantic release inside of our templates, our CI/CD templates and auto DevOps is one opportunity to enable individual contributors to, one, automatically semantically version their releases, but also generate a change log. And then as we look at more enterprise organizations who spend a lot of time crafting copy for release notes, they may want to use a issue to populate that. For example, our release post content is looking to use information from issues instead of from merge requests or from that kind of stuff. So when we think about fracturing a commit message from a release post content, that needs to be configurable. So that's the two sets of directions that we can accommodate with iteration, right? If we were to think about problems that would come down the line of setting, like allowing users to configure source per project for release notes, say that they change it midway, do we feel like there's a way to persist previous changelog information from previous releases, or would that be overridden?
Oh yeah, I think we've always persisted when we create a release, because we have a database record for the release, and it will be just another field in the database. And they also always have a way to go and manually edit it if the auto-generated stuff, or maybe not. Yeah, that's probably a decision we need to make.
But it would be like to just generate it automatically, right? And then it's up to whoever is managing that release to say, that's good, or no, I need to edit this, or the reference is wrong.
The way I see it, it's like it generates it as a draft, and you always have a way to overwrite what you don't like, remove stuff or add stuff. So it's just to save you the grunt work of going and manually collecting all that information.
Exactly. Right.
But the idea is to automate the process, right? Like even if it's a draft, it will still create a release. That's the idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's when you create a release, we create a change log based on some logic.
Yeah, what we should see is every release tag that gets created has some record of what's contained inside of that change.
Yeah.
And that is done.
We currently have the release notes fields, which is like release description that you manually have to update. So
that's what we want to insert. Like we want to.
Yeah, we may still keep this one for like some like general purpose and have another one with the auto-generated. But yeah, it's depends how which way we decide to go.
So from like a user flow perspective, we would have a user potentially using the YAML file to generate a release. And inside of that YAML file, it would allow some sort of scripting, or because today that's how users are doing it. They're scripting from the YAML file to auto-generate, or there's the option of like adding a file in like your repository or have it be a setting. So I think this is where we see some paradigms that come up in GitLab, where if we have this be a configurable option, do we need to add like an anchor to the YAML file, or how does that impact the user experience if they have the option to change like how release notes are generated? Do they need to commit that to the YAML file, or is this a setting toggle? How would you envision that?
Well, if it's configured at project level, my understanding is you do it from your settings in GitLab, and then it's applied to every release for that model, and you don't need to specify the way you generate release notes in the YAML itself. Maybe you may be able to like turn it on and off, but because if we go the other way, like specifying it in the YAML, then you basically may have different like way chosen for different release, which probably doesn't make much sense. But the way I've been imagining it's like you set this in your settings per project, and then it's applied to every release.
But then how do you manage like when the release is going to be created? Would that be another setting? Like, for example, if you push to the default branch, create the release.
Well, that's what we have now with creating releases from YAML, right?
That's right, but you have the
uses the YAML.
Yeah, it uses the YAML.
But that's to create the release, not the release notes themselves. It's just like some other work that we add on top of it.
That's why I'm bringing it up, is because right now this would be a paradigm shift for a user. We would be expecting them to set release creation in the YAML file, but then configure release notes generation in the settings panel. So we either need to offer release generation only in the YAML file or also in the settings, so that when they go to set this up in one place, it's easy to do. Hi, Piper.
I
Does
think
that make sense? Does my problem make sense? Like what I'm saying is like the disruption of introducing two places to set where you want to, the events at the same time. A release is generated, you're going to create a change log, but you would be setting your release generation in a different place from the release notes generation.
I feel like it makes more sense to have it in the YAML file at this stage, just because we already have a lot of things in place. Adding the settings increase the timelines for this if we were to go with this solution, right?
Yeah. If we think about when you create release manually from GitLab, like how it is gonna work. If we have made like few different options, you'll probably have a like select list and choose how you generate your change log, and that's basically should be the same in YAML because it's just different interface for actually the same endpoint, create release, and you may specify it. So, but we may, I don't know, there may still be need for some like more general project level configuration that will be in settings or for a group. I don't know.
And I could see people getting pretty fancy with their logic on release generation using rules and parent-child pipelines and triggering like events in different projects based off of the result inside of the releaser. So I'd be interested in how we'd want, what action we want to drive users to. So for example, if everything's going to be scripted inside the YAML file from a release generation perspective, we need to support release notes alongside that experience, or we create a global setting that specifies I'm going to only use the YAML file to specify release generation and release notes creation, or I'm going to use semantic release, or I'm going to only manually push release notes once I create a tag from master. I mean, we can go like anywhere with this. I just would want to direct users to what's the best practice that we'd want to instrument. And you're right, like what might be the first iteration may not be where we end up. This might be all in the settings panel, and it creates the YAML file for them based off of the settings that they select.
I don't know. I guess we'll have to figure out what we want and then see how we achieve it. Because
well, that's what this meeting's for.
The thing with
it's for us to talk through those big things.
One thing I found when I was working on the secrets is that at least so far we never broke backwards compatibility of CI YAML. So if we start with something with the idea to experiment, maybe YAML is not the best place, because whatever we do there, we'll have to support it forever or be the first to break syntax compatibility. So while if you like start from the UI and like manually creating releases, it's or from the API, it's easier to change. And once we have a more clear idea, we implement it in YAML or something. Probably we just need to figure out the workflow we want.
Here's kind of what I'm thinking. Say that in the settings panel, we have a bunch of toggles, and then we have an option to pop out a modal that says, create my YAML syntax from this. And then they can copy paste that into their YAML file for release generation and release notes, so that we're not breaking anything, but we're building out like every option. That's like a poorly thought out idea, but you know, like it's a builder inside the settings that they can then inject into their own YAML file.
Do we do that with any other features? Like
Visual Review kind of does that, in that you pop out a modal and then it tells you to do copy paste, you know. It's not as fit and finished.
I don't know, from my perspective, like if there's a sample in the documentation that I can use, then I'll just figure the rest out. But that's from my perspective. I don't know, maybe if there are other release managers out there that don't want to mess into the technical details, then yeah, it will be very useful, right? Because it sets everything up for them.
Yeah, like that's the difference between a build manager and a release manager. You know, a release manager may not be the technical person. They may be a project manager that's confirming gates are past their control board, you know, versus a build manager who's like actually creating the release pipeline. But I think that's a really good note, Kraz, from if we do this in the YAML file, we kind of have to go through the same pain that we went through with the release generation and the syntax with secrets. So it will be a lower barrier to entry if we build it out in the UI. I do feel like my gut is telling me that customers are going to feel friction because they're setting release generation in the YAML, and then release notes. You have to configure that somewhere else. But that might be fine in an interim experience.
Well, eventually we'll have to support this everywhere, right? Because some people will create releases from UI, some people will use CI, and some people will do it with the API endpoint. So yeah.
Yeah.
Well, at the end of the day, it uses the API, right? All the three methods are based on the API, so we can start.
Yeah. So I've always thought about it like another attribute that's passed to API that says use this thing to generate, like this method or this algorithm to generate release notes, and it's already somewhere in its existing GitLab. So you basically have a list of options to choose from.
That sounds good. So I think we already have a bunch of issues on release notes. So what I'm working on with Farnoosh, the product operations product manager, is creating a dog fooding set of release notes auto generation so that we can start getting rid of the release post as we know it today and leveraging an in-product feature for auto generated release notes. So I think what I'll do is build out some issues around setting release notes generation from the API and have that be kind of like the MVC that you can set release note generation that way. And then we can build out scope from there.
Can you just quickly give us a high level overview how we do the release post now? We have a list of issues, and it's picking up specific information from these issues and then combining this all together. Yeah.
So the release post process is super manual. As a product manager, I open up a merge request that's called a release post item, and I follow about 30 steps inside of that release post item merge request, where I open up an MR against the features YAML, and I fill that out, and then I copy paste that information into the categories YAML, and then I copy paste that feature block into a primary feature block that then gets merged into the web page for the release post that gets released on the 22nd. It has nothing to do with the merge request that's actually being merged. So that's where, like, at the end of the day, when you merge your feature, I'm refreshing the branch page to make sure that that feature's made it in, so I know whether or not to merge my release post item in. So it's completely disconnected. There isn't any relationship between the merged work that you did and the release post item that I created. So from a cycle, at the beginning of the quarter, I batch create all of these merge requests for all of our direction items that we're expecting to ship in the quarter. So I'll have about 40 merge requests open at the beginning of the quarter for the next 3 milestones. I will work with Nicole to get those items merged as you guys complete the work. And there's a bunch of handover mess in between where the release post manager then aggregates all of those merged MRs from across the 50 different product managers to create the marketing blog post that we know today.
Okay, that sounds a lot of GitLab specific. So if we make it a feature, will it work for anyone else but GitLab?
So I have validated with enterprises that they are using issues to create their content for the release notes. So they have an issue or an epic with a description, and then the copywriters will copy paste that into their web page content. So the idea of one thing is to support the creation of the release post as we know it from issue content.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. So I have that issue already created, and other customers would use that too.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because there is basically no way for us to cover everyone's use case and even like think about, but we should give them like some basic building blocks that are already GitLab features like issues, and a way to like go from there and like customize it for their use case. And what you're saying kind of makes sense. If you have if you have those issues and you just need their description as a part of your release notes, and then you specify a label name, and on every release it goes pick up those issues with that label and builds them together. Right. Just you need to figure out like which issues for which release, because you may have open issues from different releases. So something like this that's kind of generic but very flexible and still like saves people. But at the end, probably there will be people that just don't want to write them themselves, even in issue description, because they already written it in like commit message or something.
But that's where, if we support semantic release, they can leverage that industry standard tool for generating their auto change log. And the people who want more fit and finished release notes, they can leverage issue descriptions, right? I think that's where like we can support the enterprise use case and the developer use case by implementing a more industry standard tool, while then pivoting toward a more custom tool that you can afford to do with issues. So issues is where my head is at for dog fooding, because customers would also use that. And then for the more general use case, going really cheap by just implementing semantic release as a first iteration, I think would cover most of our customers' use case, because then they just have to use the semserve syntax with their commit message to get that populated. So that's my thought.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, I guess it kind of makes sense to just go with semantic release, just to generate nodes at the beginning. Yeah.
And then we can iterate.
What will be those nodes? I'm kind of missing. With semantic release, what will be the nodes? The commit messages?
Commit message. Yeah.
Well, that's not every commit message, because their commit messages would definitely
it would be only on like tags. Okay, yeah. You can specify those rules.
And it should be only tags or merge commits, or because you don't want stuff like fixing tests again, stuff like this going into your release. It depends on how you do commits, and that's like
yeah, and that depends a lot on whoever.
Yeah, it's like even more options.
That's a tricky bit with semantic release, like adding the tool, right? Because you need to educate all developers to follow this this kind of commit message.
You're so right about that. That is why Marin at the delivery team, when I was talking about dog fooding this, he's like, I don't really know if that's going to work, because it'd be a huge change management exercise for all you developers out there to effectively do this. But today, like, the release managers for each release are having to manually edit commit messages. And that's a huge amount of work for them. So anything that would reduce that lift and shift would be super helpful. And then of course, if we could knock out our release post stuff at the same time, that would be ideal, right?
A crazy idea would be like,
oh, I like crazy ideas.
From just thinking, like, you have an MR with 1,000 commits, right? At the end of the day, you choose a strategy to merge that into your default branch. If you squash that into a single commit, and that single commit had like follow this semantic release kind of commit messages, then you will solve a little bit of that issue, because it's then up to whoever is merging.
Yeah.
To set that up.
Yeah.
And that could be like a button before merging, right? Like, say, do you wanna squash and update the commit message for this? Yeah.
I love that. So when I have an issue out there about implementing semantic release in our auto DevOps templates. That might be a best practice that we create documentation for, that suggests yeah, you want to squash, set that at your project level, that you're always going to squash your commits so that you can leverage the benefits of semantic release with your work. That's perfect. I love that. I'll create an issue for that. Okay. What else about automatic release notes?
So what do we have now currently? We can create a release from CI YAML, right? Or we are about to get there very soon.
We can.
And you can provide a description in the release, which could be a file or something, and that's like the manual way. So that's where we start from, right?
Yeah, you can provide a description. You cannot provide a file just yet.
Okay.
So whatever
So it's
whatever
just
you
text.
pass in there, it's just text. Yeah.
So what we're looking at is how to make it easy to generate that content for the description. Yeah.
Like in my head, I always saw this as an option, either in the YAML file or in the API, and then that just generates that in the background.
Yeah, same. Like instead of providing the content, you say how to generate that content, and we have these different options. And now that's where it gets tricky. What are these options and how do they work?
But I can tell you that this will be a very loved feature. Whatever
or hated?
No, it'll be loved by those who use it. So that's it. It'll be super loved or it won't be used. I don't think it'll be hated. Because no one's going to hate like automation. You know, they don't.
No, I mean like it will be loved if it's there and it's fitting your use case, but you hate it if there is a way to generate nodes, but not the way you want it. So you'll be like, oh, I'm left out. Why I can't do it my way? So that's what I mean. But
You're right. I think that we'll get there though. So from like a next steps on this one, I think I will aggregate all of our issues into a new epic, and then create the API issue and potentially start scheduling some of that work in the future. I know that Farnoosh is getting really anxious to implement a dog fooding option for us so that we can get rid of the release post process, because it's a inexpensive process when you have like 50 product managers spending 2 weeks out of the month generating MRs for release posts. It's not efficient. So we'll probably see this get scheduled like in 13.6 or so.
And I was also thinking we have like sort of at least two different target groups here, because we have releases that the way we do it, which is like public facing release that you like review to the world every month or every week. But some companies also have they're never releasing anything publicly. It's all just like internal daily releases, and in that case, release notes are usually more like low level, like commit messages and developer centric. So yeah, it's tricky.
Like a change log, just
yeah, exactly. It's basically like your Git log, but like prettified. While at the other end is the release post as we know it, with like images and screenshots and whatnot. So those are two different
audiences. You're absolutely right.
And some people like release on every commit and deploy on every commit, and the release notes is basically just your like merge or what. It's like it's much more smaller scale, but more often.
So I would say that's where like semantic release comes in handy, because if you're doing a deploy on every commit, you just have a tag with the commit message and you just have a series of tags. And that that's beautiful. That just allows really, it's a navigatable system. But from a enterprises aren't doing that, right? Like they're usually aggregating all of those changes into a branch and then cutting that over to production. So that aggregation exercise is where we could really enhance the experience today.
Yeah, but they still can do this like every day or twice a day or once a week. So again, it's how often.
Yeah, that's a good call out. Okay, we have a little bit of time left. Wanted to retrospect on this session. What did you all think? How was this? Do you think you'd want to continue to do this? We can also stop the recording.
Yeah. Well, yeah, like I said, we should try at least for a while and see how it goes. I think it makes sense to have as diverse perspective on that as possible, so that you have product people, UX developers, or I don't know how it's. What would you say? How it's compared to other big things? Because it's been mostly me and Jaime saying, like pointing problems and why we can't do it, which is not much in the think big kind of.
But that's
way.
the first experiment. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're learning. But yeah, I agree. Like I think if we were to have a more broader audience, it'd be nice to listen to other perspectives, right? Not just from the developers' side. But I guess at the time it's a bit tricky.
Yeah, because right now it's like 3 a.m. for Hayana. I guess what we can do, what I can think about is having this be a discussion topic that Hayana and I have. Like we populate these ideas a week before, and then her and I could talk about it. We can record it, publish the recording, and then we can discuss that kind of feedback to get a little bit more, information. It's like we're such an anti-pattern with this meeting because it's synchronous. So it's not the GitLab way. It doesn't naturally lend itself to a super diverse audience, but we can continue iterating on that. I think it's great to have FaceTime with you all and to hear your perspectives. I love learning from you. So it's been super valuable for me. And I like when you tell me that things aren't going to happen, because I then just work harder to make it happen. So I like when you're like, no, Jackie, it doesn't work that way. Like, Kraus, it's going to eventually.
Do you know how other teams are doing it, or they're just more lucky with their time zones and like usually can make it most of the team at the same time?
They make it optional and they don't have as much interest or participation. Like Tim's group is one of the more active groups. We're sort of like the pathfinder on this. Like we created this as a release management team and established it right as package started adopting it as well. So we're like the two main advocates for this meeting. But I would say configure adopted it, testing adopted it in the ops section. And then I know plan does it pretty frequently too. But I think they make it optional and not a lot of people have the same interest as our group did.
Okay. Yeah. Well, ours is still optional. People want to participate, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, yeah, let's see how it goes.
Do we spread out like this outside of release management, like this kind of sessions?
Yeah, so we had two with package. So I think the next one that we'll do will be with monitor, from like a post-deployment monitoring experience. How do we finish the life cycle of incident management? And then there's a product design think big at the entire ops section level. So I can try to find like a recording of that, but it's seriously like 20 people on the call doing this, like just brainstorming.
Are these eventually made public outside GitLab
Mm-hmm.
or just, okay,
Yeah.
so we should.
And actually, every time like we have one of these and we have a cool topic, I'll post it on my Twitter, and we get a lot of community feedback and engagement on the issues that I link to it. So it's a really great opportunity to get customers included too, because then they start giving like their perspectives on my Twitter feed.
Yeah, I mean, like, but you should also be careful not to mention like internal info, customer names and stuff like this. So it's,
yeah,
it's
we won't publish it to public if it has anything in the not public by default. So that includes, you know, like customer information, employee information, private details about customers or deals in the pipeline.
okay.
Yeah. So I am aware of that. Also cursing. I'll edit out my cursing before I publish it. Because I just can't control my potty mouth. Okay, perfect. Well, we'll keep doing this. I'll post this recording in our channel, and then I'll probably publish it and share in the ops section Slack channel, because people like watching these. Sound good?
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. This was super great. Talk to you soon.
Fine. See ya.
Thank you.